Chin Potilej Bobochi Mayakai is a line from a Yucatec Mayan hip-hop song by Patboy and El Cima. Yucatec Maya is one of the 364 languages officially recognized in Mexico. Chin Potilaj Bobochi Mayakai translates to listen to this rap in Maya. Now, if these young hip-hop artists can express themselves in their native indigenous language, how come the myth of indigenous languages being traditional and backward persists? The word indigenous invariably evokes images of people in far-off villages living traditional lives with no connection to the modern world. There's a poster advertising the MA in Language Documentation and Description and the PhD in Field Linguistics here at SOAS, with a man staring into the distance, white paint on his face, feathers in his hair. He's an unspecified indigenous man, and the caption reads, "What's on his mind? We may never know." Now, of course, that poster is no longer used. But still, it's that kind of image that feeds into the myth that indigenous languages and the people speaking them are anchored somewhere in the distant past. We just heard that of the roughly 6,000 to 7,000 languages that are spoken in the world today, only 50% will make it to the end of the century. Now, some linguists go as far as saying it's only going to be 10%. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. But which languages are the ones likely to make that race? Which languages will survive to the end of the century? To put it differently, which languages will have the words to describe the technologies invented in the year 2099? English? Probably. Yucatec Maya, the language spoken by Patboy and El Cima? Maybe. Ainu, a language spoken in Japan by a handful of people? Unlikely. Now, at this very moment, no language, not even English, has words to describe the technologies invented in the year 2099. So how do we get those words? We invent them. Lexical creation is the process of creating new words to describe the changing world around us. We describe new technologies, new social realities, anything that comes up. 19 years ago, in the year 2000, nobody knew what retweet meant or what a Brexiteer was. Let me tell you a story about the Blackfeet. The Blackfeet are an indigenous nation of the US and Canada. Their language is spoken by less than 5,000 people. It's less than the number of students who are enrolled here at SOAS. In 2007, Daryl Kipp, a Blackfeet language activist, said, "Our kids are modern kids. They see and experience a lot, and they don't have Blackfeet words for their experiences." But then I think of when the Blackfeet saw the first horses. They don't have words to describe that either. One guy looked and said, they are ponoka, they are elk. Another guy looked and said, nah, they're not quite as big as elk, they're imita, dog. And the third guy came around and said, they're not really big enough to be elk, and they're not quite dogs either. They're somewhere in between. So you combine the two words to get ponoka imita. And that's how you say horse in Blackfeet. Now, the Blackfeet encountered a new concept, in this case an animal they hadn't come across, a horse, and they naturally invented a new name for it. And that's pretty much how it works in general in languages. We either create an entirely new word, or we take words that we already had and we combine them, or we reassign new meaning to an existing word. And all of a sudden, we don't only have a cloud that provides shade or rain, but also a cloud that provides a backup of all our precious selfies when our phone gets stolen. New words emerge in all languages all the time. All languages. No, that's not quite true. But they can emerge in all languages. As the Blackfeet story shows, it's a natural process. The issue is when not enough young or young-ish people speak a language, when it is not used in public, when the media, when the speakers of a language disperse because they're forced to leave their communities. That's when fewer new words are coined. But there's hope. Did you think that the Sauk, an indigenous community from Oklahoma, whose language is spoken by roughly as many people as in this room, had a word for computer? Of course they do. It's Piwapekwi Winitepi, literally translating to metal brain. What a great way of saying computer, right? Now, this word didn't come up naturally. It was created in a conscious effort to fill a gap. So even if you don't have enough young speakers in your language, new words can still be created. The issue is, of course, there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to creating new words. We can't just say, metal brain, great word for computer. We're going to translate that into all the languages that don't have their own word for computer, go to them and say, there you go, there's your new word, have fun with it. Please don't stop using your language. Bye. That's not how it works, unfortunately. In Icelandic, for example, people also came up with a word for computer. Tölva. Tölva is a mix of tala, meaning number, and völva, meaning witch or fortune teller. Did you know that Icelandic is only spoken by about 350,000 people? And still, the entire Microsoft Office package is available in the language. You can save, copy, paste, and customize your quick access toolbar all in Icelandic. Now, you might say, well, so what? Why shouldn't you be able to live a perfectly normal modern life in Icelandic? And you're right. After all, it's the official language of Iceland. But remember, 350,000 people speak Icelandic. Guess how many people speak Yucatec Maya, the language of rappers Bad Boy and Osima? 800,000. More than double as many people speak Yucatec Maya as speak Icelandic. In 2013, a soap opera was produced entirely in Yucatec Maya. And it was pretty much like any other Mexican soap opera. You know, love, drama, intrigue. And people talked about this soap opera. They tweeted about it, they texted about it, they sent each other voice messages, all in Yucatec Maya. And still we have this idea that languages like Yucatec Maya are somehow tied to ancient beliefs, that they're anchored in the past, and they have no place in the modern world. Why is it that it surprises us that a soap opera can be produced in Yucatec Maya, or that there are young people rapping in Yucatec Maya, but not that entire software packages are available in a language spoken by only half as many people? It's clearly nothing to do with the size of the language, but it's got to do something with the attitudes we have towards these languages. Now, when young people feel that their native language is viewed as traditional or backward, when they're told off for using it at school, when they're discriminated against for using it, they will slowly but surely shift to a larger dominant language. And that's when we get to a point where language becomes endangered. You only have the older generation speaking it, less words are created, and then we get to the point where people start saying, we don't have words for that in our language. We don't have a word for rap. We don't have a word for computer. We don't have a word for horse. And the problem with this is that it can lead to a vicious circle. And it's the typical argument used against efforts to use these languages in the media, in education, in the public sphere. And you might say, well, but why does that matter? Why should some people be forced to learn a language just to access information or education, and not others? Speakers of minoritized indigenous languages have less access to information than speakers of major languages. So there's clearly an issue of inequality. Now, imagine being in someone's shoes whose language is slowly disappearing. Imagine running out of words for the world around you. Imagine your language dying out. Remember the story about the Sauk and their word for computer, metal brain? Imagine having to come up with words for an entire field of knowledge because they were either lost or never existed. Can you imagine how slow and tiring that might be? Because it's not just about making up new words, it's also about making them stick. It's about reversing that vicious circle. And it may be slow and tiring, but there are wonderful, wonderful ways it can be done and examples of this. At the Universidad Intercultural de Veracruz in Mexico, for example, there are dissertations being written in Nahuatl, in Totonaco, in Tepehuah, in Otomí, in Popoluca. So academic content is being produced not on these Mexican indigenous languages, but in them. And simultaneously, more new terms are coined, and gaps are filled one by one. And where students might have said, we don't have words for that in our language, just a few years ago, they can now say, well, of course we have a word for that. A few years back, I visited the town that my grandmother's family is from, close to Berlin in Germany. And I realized that all the street signs were bilingual. They were in German and in Sorbian. Now, compared to Yucatec Maya, Sorbian has very few speakers. It only has about 20,000 speakers. And it's not just used on street signs because it looks pretty or multicultural. No, it's also used in universities and in schools. You can get a degree in Sorbian, and you can make a living teaching Sorbian or another subject in Sorbian at one of the bilingual German-Sorbian schools. Mirawong, one of the many languages spoken in Australia, is an even smaller language, way smaller than Sorbian. But the Mirawong community has been engaged in an effort to revitalize their language. They're fighting for their language not to die out. And they're working with linguists to create new words. One of the words they've come up with is a word for chainsaw. The thing with teeth that cuts down trees and makes a sound. Now, I know you're all thinking, well, that sounds like a really long word. And it would be in English, but it works perfectly well in Mirawong. And apart from creating words for things like chainsaw, or TV, or ATM, or telephone, or camera, they've also created an app for people who want to learn their language, to make it more accessible, for the young people in their community. So you can use Mirawong on your smartphone. I believe it's possible, at least for some languages. to reverse the vicious circle of language loss and to create a virtuous circle. For this, we need political will. We need people and institutions who support revitalization projects for languages. We need platforms like the Endangered Languages Archive here at SOAS to give these people a voice, to make their languages more visible. We need to stop exoticizing these languages. And we need to stop perpetuating the myth that Indigenous, minoritized languages are anchored somewhere in the distant past. The first step to debunking this myth is for us to change our attitudes towards Indigenous languages and to realize that they can be used for any aspect of modern life, be it hip-hop or technology or whatever. Because Indigenous languages are not a relic of the past, and they deserve a place in the future. Thank you very much.